Hello, I hope you are all doing well. I hope everybody is okay. Today, we go back to our course and we are talking about emerging cybercrime trends. And you remember I mentioned earlier that we skipped lesson 5, which is understanding information technology trends, so that we could first of all tackle lesson 6, which was a very lengthy lesson that was touching on emerging cyber crimes themselves, which is a business email compromise. I hope you can remember cryptocurrency scams, cloud-based attacks, IoT focused attacks, hacking as a service, ransomware as a service, and the insider attacks. We had first of all to learn lesson 6, and then now we want to go back to lesson 5. Now, in this lesson 5, we are mostly going to be discussing risk management process. The risk management process. Now remember, there is a risk management process in the security industry. This is how you manage risks that you face. And having spoken about the risks that we face under emerging cyber crimes, now we want to briefly discuss how we manage those risks. So we are going to be discussing the risk management process, identifying information assets, identifying security risk and evaluation, and we shall also talk about risk treatment. How do we treat risk? It is very important for you to know what we mean by information assets. As an IT professional, as an IT security professional, you should be able to know what we mean by information assets, because that is where our main concern is we talk about when we talk about cybercrime, because the crimes will be targeting these information assets. So you should be able to know what we mean by information assets. To begin off this lesson, we are going to start by looking at cybersecurity risk management, frameworks, plans, and best practices. Cyber security risk management, frameworks, plans, and best uh, practices. These are the things that we shall be focusing. So we shall be looking at cyber security risk management, frameworks, plans, and best practices. And in the modern landscape of cybersecurity risk management, one uncomfortable truth is clear. Managing cyber risk across the enterprise is harder than ever. It is harder than ever. Keeping architecture and the systems secure and compliant can seem overwhelming even for today's most skilled teams. So it is not a simple task. It is a very complicated, a very complex task that needs a detailed knowledge in technology of these systems and how they work. Also remember, what makes it very complex is that there is a new advancements in technology every day related to how these systems operate. So it is something that needs detailed knowledge, and it is not something that we can do easily. Cybersecurity risk management is uncomfortable truth is clear. Managing cyber risk across the enterprise or an organization is harder than ever. That one you have to keep it in mind. However, as more of our physical world is connected to and controlled by the virtual world, and more of our businesses and personal information goes digital, the risks become increasingly big or daunting. As we continue to get more connected, and as we continue to use systems in our businesses and in our personal life, information goes digital, the risks become increasingly complex. While it has never been more important to manage cybersecurity risk, it also has never been more difficult. Dave Hatter, a cybersecurity consultant at Intrust IT said this, that while it has never been more important to manage cybersecurity risk, it also has never been more difficult. It is completely difficult. However, as professionals, we have to try our level best and see how to manage these things. Remember, cybersecurity cannot be managed by security professionals alone. It needs to be managed by security professionals, IT engineers, IT technicians, IT professionals, IT experts. It is a field that needs, it is a team that needs to come together to manage these things effectively. And then managing cyber risk security. Why is managing cyber risk so much harder today than ever before? Start with the explosion of cloud services and third-party vendors contacting sensitive data. IT security teams have their hands full managing complex infrastructure full of vendor risk. Meanwhile, organizations face a growing number of laws and regulations that govern how confidential data must be protected. Remember, there are regulations and laws that make it even more harder on how this data must be protected. Today's organizations or enterprises are held accountable for third parties processing data on their behalf. Don't forget to factor in COVID-19 pandemic with employees working remotely on unsecured networks, scrambled security protocols. So, the COVID-19 pandemic brought in the aspect of people working remotely. When we say people working remotely, is people working from home, people working from far away from their workstations. Like me now, I am working remotely. I am training, conducting this course remotely because I am far away and I'm just using the systems and I'm using these presentations to conduct this training. So the COVID-19 pandemic brought in the issue of people working remotely. And as more people begin to work remotely, then a lot of information is now exchanged online. And as more and more information is exchanged online, the threats grow. The criminals come up with ways of hacking systems, with ways of using the cyber crimes that we mentioned in lesson 6 to commit cyber crime. Now, so facing this multitude of obstacles, how can your organizations hope to manage risk today? How can your organization manage to hope to manage risk today? I would allow you to read this below information on your own for a few minutes so that I take something here. Please just read the information below. So now, managing risk starts with the building knowledge of the risk management process, identifying the critical action steps and understanding the essential capabilities your organization will need to effectively conduct assessments and manage risk. So I think it is important if you can write that information down, because that information will guide what we are going to learn today in more detail, because these are the things that we shall look at. We are going to look at the knowledge of understanding the risk management process. That is what we shall be doing today. So facing this multitude of obstacles, how can your organization hope to manage risk today? We start from that level. We start by understanding the risk management process. What is the risk management process? That is what we are talking about. So the risk management process. What is cyber security risk management? Cyber security risk management is an ongoing process of identifying, one, analyzing, evaluating, and addressing your organization's cybersecurity threats. So you have, first of all, to identify, and then to analyze, and then to evaluate, and then to address your organization's cybersecurity threats. Because when we talk about this, we mean the threats that organizations face are different. For example, the financial sector will face different threats from the hotel industry, the hospitality industry. The hospitality industry will face different threats from the healthcare industry. So you have to understand what type of threats do we face as an organization. And then cybersecurity risk management isn't simply the job of the security team. Everyone in the organization has a role to play. So it is not only the job of the security team, everyone in the organization, beginning with the CEO, with the general manager, with the operations directors, with the IT manager, everybody, with the sales team, everybody has a role to play in cyber security risk management. That one note, everybody has a role to play. And then we ask security risk, whose responsibility it is, who takes ownership of security risk. So who would own what part of security risk? The short answer is everyone shares full ownership and responsibility. Each function has its agenda, often with limited understanding and empathy for others. IT leads with fresh ideas and new technologies, often viewing security and compliance as annoying roadblocks to progress. Remember, there is always an aspect of conflict between IT teams and security teams. I have worked for many organizations, and I know this one usually exists. IT teams usually believe that security is an obstacle. Even in most organizations, you'll discover that even other departments, they usually, in most cases, believe that security is an obstacle because security is responsible for controlling whatever happens in the organization, for putting roadblocks and ensuring people comply with the rules and regulations. So you'll find that other departments usually view security as a roadblock. Same as when we are talking about cybersecurity risk management, IT usually view security and compliance as annoying roadblocks to progress. Take note of that. And then security. Security knows safety, but is often out of touch with regulations and evolving technologies. My friend, that one is a very technical statement because it is, in one sense, very true as far as I am concerned. That most security people, security managers, security professionals, majority of them are out of touch with the regulations and evolving technologies. So what we mean here is that you as a security professional, you must work very hard to move with the technology and also to understand regulations. There are regulations that are set by the government on how information is shared, on how information is maintained, on how information is controlled, on how confidential information is secured, and you have to make an effort to develop yourself in this area, to understand the regulations and also to understand, to move with evolving technologies. The sales team is looking to keep their customers happy. For an efficient way to complete security audits. And then there is also compliance. Compliance usually wants to keep everyone out of trouble with strict adherence to regulations, often operating without an in-depth and understanding of security. So you see, these are some of the what we call the conflicts in every organization, and they exist in every organization. You will find that each department views the other department as not very important, and that should not be the case. Organizations should work, we should all work knowing that we all have a responsibility to play, and everybody has their role, and we have to respect each other's role, because you will find that if you are given IT job, you will not be able to do it if you are a security professional. And if we give the security work to an IT professional, they may not be able to do it. So we should work in harmony as we move along to developing a risk management process that will be effective. Now, key risk management action components. Development of robust policies and tools to assess vendor risk. Identification of emergent risks, such as new regulations with business impact. Identification of internal weaknesses, such as lack of two-factor authentication. So these are the key risk management action components. Key risk management action components. And then mitigation of IT risks, possibly through training programs or new policies and internal controls. And then testing of the overall security posture. And then documentation of vendor risk management and the security for regulatory examinations or to appease prospective customers. Those are the components of the risk management. We say also, effectively managing cybersecurity risk requires all functions to operate with clearly defined roles and tasks with specific responsibilities. Today's risk landscape requires a unified, coordinated, disciplined, and consistent management solution. We need to work together. That is what I have said earlier. IT needs security, and security needs the general manager's office. The general manager's office needs the HR office. The HR office needs a sales team. We need to work together in order to manage the risks that we face in our organizations. The cyber security risk management process. We are continuing with the risk management process. When it comes to managing risk, organizations generally follow a four-step process, beginning with identifying risk. Identifying risk, and we shall see how do you identify risk. And then next is assessing the risk based on likelihood of threats, exploiting vulnerabilities, and the potential impact. You have to think about the threats. You have to think about the vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are the weaknesses in the system, and you have to think about the potential impact. The potential impact. For example, a vulnerability in the system may be that your staff are required to change passwords after every 3 months, but you find that staff are ignorant. They don't want to change passwords after every 3 months as required. So that is a vulnerability. That is a weakness. And if criminals get hold of these passwords, then the potential impact might even cripple the operations of the organization. So number one is identifying risk. Please write this down. Identifying risk. And then number two is risk assessment based on the likelihood of threats, exploiting vulnerabilities, and the potential impact. And then number three is risk are prioritized, with the organizations choosing from a variety of mitigation strategies. Risks are prioritized. Prioritize is a listing what is very important as compared to the others. So what needs immediate attention or immediate action. And then the fourth steps is monitoring. Monitoring is structured to risk response and controls current despite a continually shifting environment. So monitoring. Once you have prioritized risks, then you have put in place mitigation measures, then you have to keep monitoring to ensure that everything is happening as it is required. And then developing a cybersecurity risk management plan. Identify cyber security risks. IT risks are defined as the potential for unplanned negative business outcome involving the failure or misuse of IT. In other words, what are the odds of an existing threat exploiting a vulnerability? And if so, how there would the consequences be? You know, there are some risks that may interfere with the information data of the organization until the organization is completely unable to continue in operation. And you know, these organizations, these enterprises, most of them, they are revenue generating organizations. So when the organization is unable to continue in operation, then definitely there will be a very big challenge in terms of dignity of the organization, in terms of reputation, in terms of financial losses, and in terms of inconveniences to customers, to suppliers, to vendors, and other people. So, in other words, what are the odds of an existing threat exploiting a vulnerability? And if so, how there would the consequences be? Risk identification is the first step. In the management process, modern security teams have their hands full with the growth of IT systems. The explosion of regulations and the complications of COVID-19 creating potential risks around every corner. When you are looking to identify risk, you must start by understanding threats, vulnerabilities, and the consequences of their convergence. You must start by understanding threats, vulnerabilities, and the consequences of their actions. As a supplementary lesson, I will prepare a small presentation like for 10 slides dealing with understanding threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. I'll prepare something on the side separate, and then I'll prepare it, and then I'll send it in the next class. When we do the next class, we are going to learn something about threats, vulnerabilities, and the consequences of their convergence. We continue. By the way, I hope you can hear me properly because I'm trying to not to raise my voice very much because it is actually night time where I am. Where I am now, it is a night time. It is almost 8 p.m. So my colleagues who we stay together are trying to take a rest. So I'm trying to not to disturb them a lot. But I hope we are together. Let's talk about threats. Threats are circumstances or events with the potential to negatively affect an organization's operations or assets through unauthorized access of information systems. So threats are events with the potential to negatively affect an organization's operations. Threats or assets. Threats. Threats can manifest everywhere in the form of hostile attacks, human errors, structural or configuration failures, and even natural disasters. So can you write something there about threats? Threats are circumstances or events with the potential to negatively affect an organization's operations or assets through unauthorized access of information. Just write the examples. Threats can manifest everywhere in the form of hostile attacks, human errors, structural or configurational failures, and even natural disasters. Those are what we call threats. And then vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities can be defined as weaknesses in an information system. Weaknesses in an information system. Security procedure, internal control, or implementation that can be exploited by a threat source. So vulnerability can be defined as weaknesses in an information system, security procedure, internal control, or implementation that can be exploited by a threat source. For example, weaknesses in the information technology system would be employees not switching off their systems after work. After work, all computers are left on. They are not switched off. They are not logged out. They don't log out. That is actually what we call a vulnerability, a weakness. Often, the result of inadequate internal functions like security, vulnerabilities can also be found externally in supply chains or vendor relationships. How we deal with the supply chain and how we deal with vendor relationships can also create vulnerabilities in the entire information security system. And then consequences. Consequences are results. You have heard in Kenya, we were saying choices have consequences. You remember when we were saying this when we elected the presidency of Uhuru and Ruto for the first time, like 10 years ago. We say the choices have consequences, and we have really seen the consequences. Consequences can be defined as the adverse results that occur when threats exploit vulnerabilities. Consequences can be defined as the adverse results that occur when threats exploit vulnerabilities. So you have to understand the term threats, you have to understand the term vulnerabilities, and you have to understand the term consequences for you to be able to develop cybersecurity risk management. You have to understand these terms. Their impact measures the severity of consequences, and your organization will need to estimate such costs when attempting to assess risk. Keep in mind that these costs usually come from lost or destroyed information, which can be a significant business setback for any organization. So consequences may be, we usually classify consequences into severe, moderate, or less moderate. It means that there are consequences that can be very serious, and there are consequences that are less serious. So consequences is the adverse results that occur when threats exploit vulnerabilities. Also, we have to assess cybersecurity risks. Risks assessment provide an excellent opportunity to emphasize the importance of security across your organization. Assessing risks allows your team to practice communication and cooperation to play a critical role in future risk management. So assessment of risks is also one thing that you need to do in the risk management process. What is your organization's level of risk? If I may ask, you may ask yourself as an IT person or as a security person, what are the risks in my organization? Start by naming all assets and prioritizing their importance. Second, identify all possible threats and vulnerabilities in your environment. So first, start by naming all assets and prioritizing their importance. Remember, we are talking about information assets. And then second, identify all possible threats and vulnerabilities in your environment. So attempt to determine the likelihood of a threat event occurring and conduct an impact analysis to estimate its potential consequences and cost impact. The resulting risk determination will serve as a guide to information risk management decisions and risk response measures moving forward. So this is how to access cybersecurity risks. You can see the 6 steps. Step 1, step 2. You can read them on your own. Step 1, step 2, and then I'll send you notes covering also this part of the course, and then part 3, 4, 5, and finally part 6. If you can read them from your side, it will be much better, because on my side I cannot see them clearly. I think I had to change the color of the slides to black, purely black, but I will do something about it. I'll send you these notes anyway. So those are the steps, 6 steps. And information asset. What is an information asset? An information asset can be described as information or data that is of value to the organization, including such information as patient records, if it is the healthcare industry, intellectual property, or customer information. These assets can exist in physical form on paper, CDs, or other media, or electronically stored on databases in files on personal computers. So, information asset. Information asset can be described as information or data that is of value to the organization. Information or data that is of value to the organization. like operating processes, the information on what are your policies, standard operating policies, standard operating procedures, what are your formulas for managing your work, or what are the formulas for designing certain products that you produce. This is what we call information or data that is of value to the organization. That is what we call information asset. Identifying information asset. How do you identify information assets? How do you identify information assets? Information assets, like any other asset of an organization, need to be identified and managed so their maximum value can be utilized and they can be appropriately accessed, used, shared, and disposed of. Discovery is the first step to identifying what information and records are held. Who holds this information? How they are held and managed, what strategic and operational objectives they support, and how they are used throughout the organization and its ecosystem. For example, licenses. Licenses are usually held by operating licenses. They are usually held by the finance manager or finance director. And where are they kept? They are kept in the finance office in cabinets, securely stored and locked under key and lock. And who manages them? Who uses them? The general manager or the operations director or the finance manager. When the government comes to carry out audits or to check whether the organization is properly licensed to do its business, then the finance manager will definitely be the one who is required to reveal. So discovery is the first step to identifying what information and records are held, who holds them, how they are held and managed, what strategic and operational objectives they support, and how they are used throughout the organization and its organ ecosystem. So discovery is the first step, and then after discovery, and then an organization may already have existing resources it can use to help in its discovery. In this discovery, for example, an approved disposal authority, business process maps, and information audit reports or surveys. Disposal, how is information disposed? And disposal is the information that is no longer needed. How is it discarded or how is it disposed? And as you know, in most organizations, especially physical hard copies information has to be shredded. There are shredders in organizations before this information is actually disposed. And then also we say examples of information assets. What are examples of information assets? A database of contacts is an example of information asset. Contacts, database. You see a file with all contacts of the stakeholders of the organization, the customers, the suppliers, the employees, the contractors, the vendors. A database of contacts. Contacts is an example of a single information asset. Each entry in the database is not treated individually. The collection is considered one information asset. All the information and records associated with a specific project may be considered a single information asset, such as spreadsheets, documents, images, emails to and from project staff, etc. So all the information and the records associated with a specific project. This may be considered as an example of an information asset. So contacts is an example of information assets. Information related to specific project is an example of an information assets. For example, financial payroll records, it is another example of information asset. So these are the information assets. You may also find there is a database of all the other physical assets in the organization that are compiled together and saved, archived in one folder. That is one, we can also call that one as an information asset that details what assets or what equipments are existing within a particular enterprise or a particular organization. And then we say information and records with varied content managed in an enterprise content management system should not be identified as a single information asset. The system is the container only. We say information and records with varied content managed in an enterprise content management system should not be identified as a single information asset. The system is the container only. So what we mean is that there are various information single assets existing in a particular organizations, different, like HR records, detailing the number of employees, their details, their background, their referees, their CVs. This is what we call information single assets. And then we say identify possible cybersecurity risk mitigation measures. This is another aspect in the entire risk management process. Identify possible cybersecurity risk mitigation measures. Identifying and assessing risks is just the beginning. What is your organization going to do about the risks you find? What will your mitigation response be for managing these risks? How will you manage residual risk? We need also to understand the term residual risk. The all-important third step of response starts by understanding all options for risk mitigation. The team can employ either technological or best practice methods, ideally a combination of both. Technological risk mitigation measures include encryption, firewalls, threat hunting software, and engaging automation for increased system efficiency. Record that information down and read more about it. It will be in the notes. Technological risk mitigation measures include encryption, firewalls, threat hunting software, and engaging automation for increased system efficiency. Also on your own, find out the meaning of these terms. Find out the definition of these terms. What is encryption? What is a firewall? What is threat hunting software? And what is engaging automation for increased system efficiency? You do also a little research on your own regarding those terms. And then we also have best practice for risk mitigation. The best practice for risk mitigation. This is just an example. The best practice for risk mitigation begins with conduct cybersecurity training programs. Conduct cybersecurity training programs. Update software. Deploy privileged access management systems solutions. Deploy multi-factor authentication, access authentication. Deploy dynamic data backups. Backups are very important. This is the best practices for risk mitigation. Best practices for risk mitigation. Conduct cyber security training programs. Update softwares. Deploy privileged access management solutions. Deploy multi-factor access authentication. Deploy dynamic data backups. And then residual cybersecurity risk. This is the risks left over after applying all mitigation measures. The type of unavoidable risk the organization can't do much about. There are only two choices for residual risk. Learn to live with it or transfer it to an insurance provider who will shoulder it for a fee. So this is the risk that the organization cannot do anything about it, because the organization has to operate, and we cannot, in the security industry, we say we cannot eliminate risk 100%. There is usually 1% that is remaining that we cannot do anything about it. That is what we call residual risk. And the only solution to this is to learn to live with it or transfer it to an insurance provider who will shoulder it at a fee. When estimating damage costs of cybersecurity risk, keep three types of expenses in mind. So there is what we call estimating damage costs of cybersecurity risk. Operational costs involve lost time or resources and are easy to calculate. Fixed costs can include fines for non-compliance or lost income when existing clients defect or new opportunities are lost. The hardest to calculate is the reputational cost associated with the breaches that violate customer privacy and trust. In fact, this is the hardest one to calculate, and it is the most severe kind of damage. The reputational damage, the reputational cost. When customers lose trust in you, when suppliers lose trust in you because of breaches that have violated their privacy and trust, then that one can affect the organization at a greater length. Use ongoing monitoring. After identifying, assessing, and mitigating the risk in your environment, the team will need to monitor environments to ensure internal controls maintain alignment with IT risk. The organization must monitor regulatory change, staying abreast of all regulations, and their shifts will ensure internal controls align with outside expectations. Vendor risk. Be sure to assess and document security and compliance controls as new vendors are on board. Remember, their shortcomings can become your headache. Internal IT usage. Know what technology your internal teams use and how they use it to stay ahead of potential gaps. Also, in conclusion, managing risk across the enterprise is harder than ever today. Modern security landscapes change frequently, and the explosion of third-party vendors, evolving technologies, COVID-19 pandemic, and the continually expanding minefield of regulation challenge organizations. With this backdrop, it's becoming critically important for your organization to employ a risk management process. And then in the first analysis, there is no rest in the modern pursuit of risk management. It hardly seems fair in a climate of continuous and unparalleled change, with the threat and vulnerabilities multiplying by the minute. With the help of analytics, collaboration, communication, issue management tools, and third-party risk management frameworks, smart and successful organizations will continue to hold their own in the battle to manage IT risk and maintain security across the enterprise. What we mean to say here is that this is a process that involves everybody in the organization, a process that involves the stakeholders, a process that involves the CEO, the general manager, not only the security manager, not only the IT professionals. It involves everybody must take part in the risk management process in the organization. Cybersecurity risk management is a wide field that needs the cooperation of everybody within the organization. And then identify and assess to create risk management, risk determination. Then choose a mitigation strategy and continually monitor internal controls to align with risk. Reassessment, new testing, and ongoing mitigation should always play a prominent role in any risk management initiative. I hope we are together. I'm just opening your mind into the risk management process, how it is supposed to be carried out in the organization or in the enterprise. Even from a security side, physical security, there is also risk management. Even from the IT side, there is cybersecurity risk management process. So we have to be conducting these risk management processes from time to time, and what we have learned here is that we have to continually keep monitoring these processes to ensure everything is working as expected, because technology is changing, the organization is changing, the threats are growing. So we have to remember that cybersecurity risk management is a huge process. It is a very detailed process that needs the cooperation of everybody within the organization. With those few remarks, I'll say thank you very much. We will meet again for our second lesson. Our second lesson, the following lesson will be lesson number 7, because we have already covered lesson number 6. Now we are going to lesson number 7. So